evidence for the motion of the earth was the motion of the tides, that the real reason for the ebb and flow of the sea was the rotation and revolution of the earth. Just the way if you try to carry a bowl of soup from the stove to the table and the water sloshes in the bowl, that's what was happening to the earth. But this is in fact not the case. The tides are caused by the pull of the moon. And Galileo rejected that idea. He thought that sounded like astrology, like pseudoscience, that the moon was, although it was Earth-like, it was too far away to have any effect on the waters of the earth. So his favorite evidence for the motion of the earth was the 4 moons that he had found around Jupiter. Because when people were arguing that the earth couldn't be in motion, one of the reasons people thought that was, we know the moon is going around the earth. If the earth is going around the sun, how can it carry the moon along with it? But now that Jupiter was seen to be carrying 4 moons along with it, that argument seemed to no longer hold water. Now, this is the title page of the wonderful book, and it says right on the title page that it's news for everybody, but especially for mathematicians and astronomers, about these wonderful things that have been discovered, and the most wonderful of all being these Medicean stars. This book sold out within days of its publication, and we are right around the time that it was put up for sale. And when you think about what news transmission was like at that time, you know, how fast could things go? They could gallop on a horse, or they could sail on a fast ship. And in a very short time, this news was all over the world. Galileo went on to look at sunspots, and this is one of his drawings that he made following the sun over an entire month's period. And because he watched for that long and observed the spots so carefully, he realized that some of them were disappearing over one limb of the moon and then coming back a couple of weeks later. And that is how he discovered the rotation of the sun, another thing that had never even been imagined before, the sun's monthly rotation. Again, a myth when I was growing up. I always thought that Galileo had gone blind because of his observations of the sunspots. But he was much too smart to try to look at the sun through a telescope. Of course, it would have hurt terribly. He would have known that he was being burned. But his setup was to let the sunlight fall through the telescope tube onto a piece of paper where he could actually trace the sunspots. There is a doctor in England who is fascinated with the reason for Galileo's blindness. I mean, of all people in history to go blind, it's perhaps most disturbing, most poignant that Galileo, who saw more than anyone before him, should end his days in blindness. But he lived to be almost 80 years old. So by the end of his life, there were numerous reasons for him to be blind, as any of us may go blind in our 70s. But if you look at this portrait, so this doctor has been studying portraits of Galileo to see if there's anything that his contemporaries noticed about his face while they were painting him that might suggest a reason for his blindness. And so here, just look at his eyes, see how they're not really focused the same way. The right eye is turned out, and it seems to be looking down, and over the eyebrow he has this swelling, which also appears under the brow. It goes right to the corner of his eye. There's a medical term for this. It's called frontal sinus mucocele. I should have told the translator that term before I started talking. He's compared this portrait with photographs of people who come into his clinic with this condition. It's not necessarily a cause of blindness, but it seems to have been one of the many eye problems Galileo suffered. Even as a boy, he had chronic eye infections. As an adult, after he did his first telescope studies, he was very ill his whole life. He had numerous periods where he would be confined to bed for weeks at a time. And after one of his illnesses, he reported that he now saw a halo around any kind of light. And you can imagine what a handicap that would be for an astronomer looking through a telescope. But he had this halo image, which eventually did go away. So he had a history of eye trouble his entire life. Any of those things might have ultimately resulted in his blindness. So, although Galileo was convinced that Copernicus was right and the Earth was actually in motion, this was a very difficult idea to sell. And he needed other kinds of observational evidence. And it occurred to him that if the Earth is a planet, and it's the third one from the sun, then the interior planets should show phases as they orbit the sun. And so he observed Venus and was able to see, sure enough, that when Venus is approaching, when it's at its closest and looks so brilliant in the sky, it is actually a thin crescent, but very large. And that the only time we see Venus full is when it's on the other side of the sun. This is just an imagined picture of Galileo trying to discuss astronomy with the church fathers. And here he is talking about, that's probably Venus in the picture, or maybe it's the crescent moon, and the planet Jupiter with its 4 little moons. His first supporters were the Jesuit astronomers at the Roman College. They acquired a telescope, they looked at the things he had looked at, and they said, "We agree with everything he said. We have seen all of these same things. We just don't agree with the conclusions that he's drawing from them," because they really couldn't do that. Because of this time period. Copernicus predated Galileo by almost a century. And Copernicus was also Catholic, was in fact in the employ of the Catholic Church. He worked his whole life as a canon, a cathedral canon, and he was also a doctor. So he was the personal physician to the bishop. But in his spare time, he developed this theory of a sun-centered cosmos with the Earth as a planet in motion. And by the time he finished his book for publication, and the book was actually printed, he was elderly and suffered a stroke and died as soon as the book appeared. So he never had to hear what anyone thought of it. I've often thought about that myself, as a strategy. for publishing something dangerous. Just plan to do it on your deathbed. Of course, that was not his plan, but that was how it worked out. So this was the old view, with the earth in the center, and the four ancient elements, the earth at the very center, surrounded by water, then air, then fire, then out to the sphere of the moon and beyond through the planets. But Copernicus turned all of that over in favor of his model with the sun at the center. When today we feel so smug, of course we know that. But if nobody had told you that, if you had to discover it for yourself, how easy do you think it would be? To think that we are spinning around at 1,000 miles an hour, that is not at all obvious. And even after somebody tells it to you, it's still pretty incredible. It doesn't feel like it's moving. And it was a very tough sell. Oh, and the 1,000 miles an hour is just the speed of rotation. The speed of revolution is 70,000 miles an hour. So you can't really blame people for being slow to go along with the idea. This was Maffeo Barberini, who became Pope Urban VIII. Galileo's enthusiasm for Copernicus had gotten him into some trouble. And he had been told fairly soon after Siderius Nuncius that he should stop talking about these things in public. And he did. And part of the problem was, between the time of Copernicus and the time of Galileo, there had been the Council of Trent. Because the Protestant Reformation, which occurred during Copernicus's time, had led to this terrible split in the church, and the Catholic Church had to respond to the Protestant criticism. And a major argument of the Counter-Reformation was the interpretation of the Bible, that Luther's idea of a personal interpretation of the Bible was completely wrong, and that if you were a good Catholic, you accepted the interpretation of the Bible that was supported by the church fathers, and you did not dare to interpret the Bible yourself. And certain people tried to look at passages in the Bible that referred to the Earth's stability and reinterpret them in terms of Copernicus. And all of those people were told to stop doing that it was not their province to talk about those things. But when Urban came to power, because he'd been Galileo's friend, Galileo thought maybe the time was right to talk about these things, that after all, the reason God had created human beings with intelligence and vision and manual dexterity was we were supposed to figure out the universe. We were supposed to do science. The Bible was the true word of God on matters of salvation, but it did not teach astronomy. And wherever it talked about astronomy, it spoke in a manner of speaking, just the way we still talk about sunrise and sunset, even though we know it's the earth turning that's causing those things. So the Bible just spoke about the sun moving in the sky in that sense, not to establish as fact that the sun moves and the earth is still. And Galileo wanted to write in the popular language, in Italian, the two big arguments, the earth-centered and the sun-centered, and examine them for a popular audience. And he got permission to do that. But Urban insisted that somewhere in the book, Galileo was going to have to present the Pope's philosophy of science. Now, to the Pope, if a mere mortal could actually figure out the universe just by doing the math, it would be a pretty puny universe. A universe befitting an omnipotent creator would have to be much too complicated for an ordinary mortal to figure out. There could be a different set of laws of physics for every individual phenomenon. If that's your attitude, it becomes impossible to do science, right? I mean, you have to think you're getting somewhere. You have to think that as you develop the constants and the formulas, that this is actually meaningful on earth as it is in heaven. So this is where they disagreed on their philosophy of science. And this is the title page of the great dialogue on those topics. It's a very beautiful book. Again, very popular, a huge hit, a bestseller. And books at that time could not simply be published. Everything had to go through censorship and get permission for publication. This book got censored twice. The whole process started in Rome, but then there was an outbreak of malaria, there was plague, so Galileo went home to Tuscany and could no longer travel back and forth easily, nor could the book be sent back and forth easily because packages were stopped, were fumigated. I mean, you know what it's like now to get on an airplane. You know how you have to be screened and tested. So that too had its precedent in centuries past. So he had the book censored again in Florence, and it passed both procedures, and still, once the book appeared, it made people terribly angry. And the Pope's philosophy, which appears on the last page of the book, is put in the mouth. See, he arranged the book very cleverly. It's actually a conversation among friends. They decide they're going to take 4 days off from their normal pursuits and just seclude themselves to talk about the universe. We should all be doing something like that. I mean, we are doing something like that at this Congress. And so they argue about the construction of the universe. And one of them is very much the Galileo personality. The other is another very intelligent person, but open-minded and asking questions. And the third one represents the university scholar who is very traditional in his thinking and doesn't like the introduction of new ideas, and often argues, lapses into Latin phrases in his arguments. And he is the one who, on the last page, expresses the Pope's philosophy, which may be one of the reasons the Pope got so angry. And Galileo was called to trial before the Inquisition, and the book was banned, and it stayed on the index of prohibited books for 200 years, long after people accepted the idea of the Earth's rotation and revolution. Likewise, Copernicus's book remained on the index until the 19th century. So whenever I worry about something that I'm publishing and how it may be received, I always think, well, nothing that happens to me could be anywhere near as bad as what happened to Galileo. And I take courage in that. This is Galileo's tomb. in the Church of Santa Croce. Of course, when he died, he was under house arrest. He had been prohibited from publishing anything else in Italy. But fortunately, his writings were carried outside the country. And his next book, which was his discourse on the two new sciences, which is considered his masterpiece of physics, is it's really nowhere near as much fun to read. I mean, the same characters do the same kind of thing, but it's lost the vitality that the dialogue had, and no wonder, considering what Galileo had to suffer in those years, the trial, the banning of his book, his return home to the death of his daughter, then his failing health, his blindness, things really piled on him, and yet he had an almost indomitable spirit and kept on writing and working to the very end. So at his death, he was the Grand Duke was prohibited from giving him a big funeral or a fancy grave or even a long funeral speech. And so he was buried in a little chapel, and only later were his remains moved to this tomb that you can visit now. And this beautiful image of Galileo speaking with the muses, you can see in the wonderful exhibit of books at the planetarium. I would urge you all to go look at that. It is thrilling to see the original documents, the original books. This is not something you have an opportunity to look at. They are there for you. This is the Galileo spacecraft, which of course was a victim of its own success, because once it discovered the ocean on Europa, people got all excited. Where there is water, there might be life, and NASA actually destroyed the spacecraft so that sometime in the future, when they can no longer control it, it wouldn't accidentally blunder into Europa and perhaps kill something there. This is an image by a space artist showing Jupiter as the center of astrological significance as Galileo presented it to Cosimo. And here's the little ghost of the spacecraft. And this is the latest Galileo telescope, which is in the Canary Islands. Of course, it's a suite of instruments. Very few astronomers now actually stand outside with a long tube held at the eye. But the International Year of Astronomy gave them lots of occasion to go out with groups of children, adults, and help people see the things Galileo saw. And if any of you missed doing that during the International Year of Astronomy, let's consider this the International Decade of Astronomy, the International Century of Astronomy. I went to the closing ceremonies of the International Year of Astronomy, and there was great excitement about just continuing the push indefinitely into the future. I think we were getting a little close on time, so just show you, this is a unique picture in which everybody in it looks terrible. We all just, it was the worst image of all of us, but it was a great moment because we were trying to decide what the definition of a planet really is. Because even in our own time, this discussion has continued. Medicean star, Cosmian star, is Pluto a planet? Is it not? What is a planet? So this was a moment of trying to decide that. And here's an image of Galileo you've probably not seen. I will close with this, and again return to the concept of Galileo as a great communicator of science. the Canadian newspaper, the Globe and Mail, decided to select the 50 greatest books of all time. And you'll be happy to hear that one of those books was Galileo's Dialogue. And the newspaper wanted people who were somehow familiar with each of these 50 books to write a little something about the book, and they had an artist draw a caricature. So this is how Galileo was presented. His books may be 400 years old, but they still stand up as exemplars of science writing. And all of us who communicate science to the public would do well to take his example, because it was his enthusiasm that he always projected, and an enthusiasm that he assumed in his audience, that if you could talk to people who were curious, they would want to know, that you didn't have to give it to them as some kind of bitter medicine that was good for them to know about, that you should just share in the best, most generous, and most excited way you could what you knew. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias, Dava, por esta charla. Finalizamos ahora, tenemos un receso. Os quería informar de algunas cosas. A partir de las 11:30 se desarrollan las sesiones de comunicaciones que tienen lugar en la tercera planta. Hay 3 salas, Copérnico, Galileo y Darwin. En el libro de ponencias se explican qué ponencias hay en cada una, en esas tablas iniciales. Y, en cualquier caso, en esta sala habrá una representación de la obra de teatro El honor perdido de Henrietta Leavitt, pero es para escolares. La nuestra, por así decirlo, la sesión nocturna para público adulto no es que cambie, es por vuestra edad. Que es perturbador para todos los chavales que vengan aquí encontraros a vosotros. Entonces yo os invito en cualquier caso a tomar ahora un café. También sabéis que hay conexión wifi, los datos están ahí. Quería decir, en todas las presentaciones se me olvidó comentar que una de las patas fundamentales del mundo de la comunicación es evidente el mundo del periodismo. Este congreso cuenta con la especial colaboración de la Asociación Española de Comunicación de la Comunicación Científica, y con la Asociación de Periodistas de Navarra. Gracias a unos y a otros tendremos además a lo largo de este congreso un boletín diario que nos está editando la empresa Divulga y que creo estará fuera para que podáis tenerlo, el primer número. No va a ser una publicación de larga tirada, pero sí intentamos que recoja un poco ahí. Lo digo porque igual seréis asaltados de vez en cuando, alguno de vosotros seréis asaltados por algún periodista buscando la noticia. Es lo habitual en estos sitios. Muchísimas gracias y buen café. Parte que hemos llamado durante estos días Cajala al Congreso sobre comunicación social de la ciencia. Soy Javier Armentia, trabajo en el Planetario de Pamplona y os quería saludar porque estáis aquí convocados para ver una obra de teatro que se titula El honor perdido de Henrietta Leavitt, que es un proyecto que nació para el año pasado, que se celebraba en todo el mundo el Año Internacional de la Astronomía. Quizás tuvisteis oportunidad de participar en alguna de las actividades. de oír hablar de las actividades que en todo el mundo se han ido haciendo como conmemoración de la labor de los astrónomos en los últimos 4 siglos, desde el momento en que Galileo miró por el telescopio. En el Museo de la Ciencia y el Cosmos de La Laguna, en Tenerife, en Canarias, pensaron que una de las formas de hablar de la astronomía era recuperar el papel de algunas mujeres que avanzaron el conocimiento del universo. Carmen del Puerto es periodista, dirige este proyecto de museo científico en Canarias y es la responsable de esta obra de teatro que hoy vais a contemplar, El honor perdido. Ella os va a comentar un poquito, antes de comenzar a verla, de qué se trata el proyecto, quién era Henrietta Leavitt y por qué, en cierto modo, estamos todos aquí. Sin más, yo desde la organización de este Congreso sobre Comunicación Social de la Ciencia quiero daros la bienvenida y permitidme que os diga también y que os anime a que a través de la propia web del Congreso, unanuevacultura.es, podáis seguir también a lo largo de estos días la celebración del Congreso y las informaciones de muchas actividades que van a tener lugar, no solamente teatro, también otro tipo de actuaciones, talleres, y espero que algunas de ellas también os interesen. Buenos días, Carmen, por favor.
Buenos días a todos. De ritual mágico a ceremonia de culto a los dioses en sus orígenes, desde simple actividad contemplativa hasta género literario, el teatro también es un eficaz medio transmisor de ideas y de cultura y una forma de dar a conocer los cambios que se producen en la sociedad, combinando educación y entretenimiento. Convencido del gran potencial de las artes escénicas como recurso para la divulgación científica, el Museo de la Ciencia y el Cosmos, del Organismo Autónomo de Museos y Centros del Cabildo de Tenerife, ha producido la representación multimedia que hoy os mostramos. Si bien no es la primera vez que el museo se embarca en experiencias teatrales con fines pedagógicos y lúdicos. El honor perdido de Henrietta Leavitt quiere ser un homenaje al papel de las mujeres en astronomía, mujeres cuya labor no obtuvo el merecido reconocimiento debido a los prejuicios que en el pasado limitaban la percepción y valoración de lo femenino a la esfera puramente doméstica. La historia de Henrietta Swan Leavitt es un relato construido a partir de la poca documentación que existe sobre su vida y obra. Astrónoma americana nacida en el siglo XIX, a ella le debemos la regla de medir grandes distancias en el universo. Leavitt y su colega Annie Jam Cannon, ambas pertenecientes al famoso equipo de mujeres que trabajaba en el Observatorio de Harvard, bajo las órdenes de Edward Pickering, y curiosamente las dos con limitadas capacidades auditivas, son las protagonistas de nuestro teatro cósmico. Pero esta obra también incorpora elementos de ficción y anacronismos intencionados cuya finalidad es jugar con la ambientación, buscando siempre la complicidad del público, de todos vosotros. El título, El honor perdido de Henrietta Leavitt, es un préstamo, entre comillas, del premio Nobel Heinrich Böll, autor del honor perdido de Katharina Blum, y la concurrencia de 3 únicas figuras sobre el escenario en un espacio-tiempo sin definir está tomada de otro premio Nobel, Jean-Paul Sartre, quien tan magistralmente introdujo a 3 actores en el infierno con su drama A puerta cerrada. Por último, también es una usurpación el personaje masculino, Edward Roscoe Murrow, robado, de nuevo entre comillas, al periodismo de mediados del siglo XX y al cine del siglo XXI, retratado en la película Buenas noches y buena suerte. Este proyecto se realiza en colaboración con el Planetario de Pamplona, organizador de esta 5ª edición del Congreso de Comunicación Social de la Ciencia, una nueva cultura, donde se han proyectado 2 funciones que completan así las 6 que se representaron en Tenerife el año pasado. El proyecto cuenta con financiación de la Fundación Española de Ciencia y Tecnología, del Ministerio de Ciencia e Innovación, y fue diseñado para celebrar el Año Internacional de la Astronomía 2009 y el Año Europeo de la Creatividad y la Innovación. El personal del museo, los actores y todos los demás colaboradores en esta obra hemos puesto mucha ilusión y trabajo. También el estupendo personal técnico de este Palacio de Congresos. Hemos intentado cuidar en lo posible los detalles y el diseño con el fin de hacer más atractivo su planteamiento, desde la escenografía al vestuario, pasando por la proyección de imágenes en pantalla. Igualmente, hemos prestado especial atención a los efectos de sonido, porque son claves en una representación donde la música tiene un papel protagonista. En particular, las canciones de Shirley Bassey, que nos servirán de transición entre escena y escena, 13 en total, distribuidas en 3 actos. Como directora del Museo de la Ciencia y el Cosmos y de este proyecto, sinceramente espero que disfrutéis con El honor perdido de Henrietta Leavitt. Y por favor, apagad los móviles y os pido por favor un silencio absoluto para que los actores no pierdan la concentración. Muchas gracias.
Diamonds are forever. They are all I need to please me. They can stimulate and tease me. They won't leave in the night. I've no fear that they might desert me. Diamonds are forever. Stroke it and undress it. I can see every part, nothing hides in the heart to hurt me. I don't need love, for what good will love do me? Diamonds never lie to me, for when
La primera convención sobre los derechos de la mujer en Estados Unidos se celebró en 1848 en un condado de Nueva York llamado Seneca Falls.
Su famosa declaración marca el origen del movimiento feminista en este país.
Documento que reivindica los derechos de la mujer a una mejor educación, a gozar de iguales oportunidades de empleo con igual retribución económica y a votar y a ser elegidas para cargos políticos.
En la última sesión, la feminista Lucretia Mott subrayó que la rapidez y el éxito de la causa dependerían del celo y de los esfuerzos, tanto de los hombres como de las mujeres, para derribar el monopolio de los púlpitos.
Y para conseguir la participación equitativa de la mujer en los diferentes oficios, profesiones y negocios.
El feminismo se consolidó en Estados Unidos gracias a movimientos protestantes y a las tesis abolicionistas.
El fervor religioso obligó a la alfabetización de las mujeres, que debían saber leer para hacer una interpretación personal de la Biblia.
Un compromiso que se extendió a la educación superior, permitiendo su acceso a la universidad.
El abolicionismo contribuyó por su parte a que las mujeres tomaran conciencia de su situación análoga a la de los esclavos sin derechos.
Aunque realmente ellas no consiguieron el derecho al voto hasta 1920, con la 19ª enmienda a la Constitución americana.
El norte de Estados Unidos, donde nació la astrónoma Henrietta Swan Leavitt en el siglo XIX, fue siempre protestante y abolicionista.
Un contexto favorable para potenciar su intelecto y el de otras mujeres que tuvieron un papel importante en la historia de la astronomía, no siempre bien reconocido.
The law will allow one roll for the whole shebang, one throw that bell will go clang. Though I'm alone, I'm a gang. Eye on the target and wham! One shot gunshot and bam! Hey, world, here I am! Don't tell me not to fly, I've simply got to. If someone takes a spill, it's me and not you. Don't bring around a crowd to rain on my parade.
Dommage, our love was once exciting. Now it's just a game we play. Too bad, but nothing lasts forever.
Isn't it rich? Are we a pair? Me here at last on the ground, and you in midair, sending the clowns. park, watching winter turn to spring, walking in the dark, seeing lovers do their thing. That's the time I feel like making love to you. That's the time I feel like making dreams come true. Oh, baby, when you talk to me, when you're alone and sweet and low, when you touch me and my feelings start to show, that's the time I feel like making love to you. That's the time I feel like making dreams come true. Oh, baby, oh, baby, in a restaurant, holding hands by candlelight, while I'm touching you, wanting you with all my might.
work from morning till night, for computing is our duty. We are faithful and polite, and our record books are beauty. With Greenland, shop, net and pace, we labor hard all day. We add, subtract, multiply and divide, and we never have time to play. No, 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 we never, never play. No, 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 we never, never play. We sit our decks all day, we work from morning till night, and computing is our duty. We are faithful and polite, and our record books are beauty. Computing is our duty, our record books are beauty. We work from morning till night, we are faithful and polite.
I had a dream about you, baby. It's gonna come true, baby. They said we were through, but baby,
was just one of those things, just one of those crazy flings.
to do, how to move him.